Great. So thank you everyone for coming to the January Learning and Development session on search algorithms and the state of today's media. River Campus Library's own Bob Berkman will be presenting today. On behalf of the LDC, I want to say a few words about Bob's unique expertise in this area before we begin. So Bob has been writing and teaching about searching Google as well as the evolution of online news and journalism for many years. He is the founder and editor of the Information Advisor's Guide to the Internet Research, which is a journal for professional business researchers. Bob has also served on the faculty at the School of Media Studies for the New School of Social Engagement in New York City, where he has taught graduate courses on digital media ethics, social media research methods, and other courses. He has also written several books on effective research and online journalism, including Find It Fast, Extracting Expert Information from Social Networks, Big Data, Tweets, and More, as well as co-authoring Digital Dilemmas, Ethical Issues for Online Media Professionals. And now, let's welcome Bob to our session today.
Stephanie. All right, let's see. All right, is this mic? Can you hear me okay? Is the mic working? Okay, pretty good. Okay, great. All right, well, thanks everybody for coming out today. So yeah, it's kind of a two-parter today. Kind of decided to combine two related but different topics. First part today, which will take about 30 to 35 minutes, we're going to talk all about how search engines, how they've evolved and how they're changing, really, focusing on Google. And so we're going to talk about why that makes a difference, too, why it's of interest to us as librarians, as for students, and for searchers. And then we're going to spend some time talking about, hopefully a little bit more interactive and as a group, about what's happening with how younger people are interacting with the news and media. So just basically, in terms of part one, we're just going to go over a very brief history of online search, kind of how it's evolved, condensing a long period of time into just a couple of minutes or less. Talk about what happened when Google was introduced, why it changed so much, what's happening now with Google, how with its machine intelligence and machine learning, why it's changing, what we're getting on Google. We'll address the issue that's come up in the media recently about bias in Google, whether that really holds any truth or not, and then Q&A. But if you have questions while I'm talking, feel free to shout them out. And then in part two, we're going to talk about what is the data telling us now about how social media and journalism are being utilized by young people. What are some of the major themes about the way they're using social media and other alternative sources for their news, and what should our role as librarians, educators, and so forth be in all this. So kind of doing a very quick evolution of online search. So I'm going to go 50s, 60s, 70s. So in the 50s, and let's see, hopefully this will work. I'm going to show you a brief clip from a movie. How many people have seen the movie Desk Set? Okay, some of you, good, some haven't. It's a great story about what happens when an efficiency expert, Spencer Tracy, goes into a major corporate library, a media library, called CBN, they called it. Katharine Hepburn was a major librarian, and he brought in this giant brain, Emmerich, to take over the librarian's job because it could do the best searching. So I'm just going to play a short clip from there.
What happened you never get back? Do you know what that Richard Sumner's doing?
Yeah, he's up on the roof feeding the pigeons.
No. Do you know what he's doing here?
What?
He's trying to replace us all with a mechanical brain. He's under special assignment to his eye to see if Emmerich can be adapted to this department. That means the end of us all.
Peg, calm down. No machine can do our job.
Oh, that's what they said in payroll.
Did he design the machine in payroll?
Yes, and as soon as it was installed, half the department disappeared.
Well, the machine in payroll is just a calculator. They can't build a machine to do our job. There are too many cross-references in this place. I'd match my memory against any machines any day, and yours.
All All right, so if anyone hasn't seen the movie, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun and some great actors, of course. So that was the first view in the 50s. This giant room-sized computer called Emmerich was going to do all the searching that the librarians had previously done. Then, as we got into the 60s, there was another theme, our fears of being overtaken. People probably recognize who this is. You know, the voice of that Val just passed away about a month ago, in fact. But there's a great line in 2001, A Space Odyssey, where Hal says, I'm sorry, Dave, I cannot do that, you know, where they begin to take on their own autonomy and agency. So then we had this period also of the fear of what are these giant smart computers going to do for us. Then, moving into the 1970s, things started to tame down a little bit. Computers started seeming a little bit more practical, and first online search systems began coming into the workplace. And there's a great short clip here created by one of the very first ones was in Lockheed and Dialogue Information Services founder Roger Summit, who was one of the founders. How many people here have heard of Roger Summit? Just curious. Okay, he's really considered the father of online search. He created the first really iterative search process. Before he created his system, which eventually became Dialogue, when he worked at Lockheed, people would say, it's so hard to revise a search, it's easier to start your research all over again. And so here's an example of a clip from the 1970s using the online service Dialogue.
These keywords allow a direct dialogue between a computer and the scientist.
That question about osmosis filtration, what's happening about it?
The computer asks certain questions for identification.
The first question is search title, and I type in the title of my search, osmosis filtration.
The analyst first decides on a keyword under which the required reports may be indexed. Questions are formulated in plain language, but he should have an understanding of the logical and or not.
I expand the term filtration.
The computer responds by displaying an alphabetical listing of terms. Also shown under the heading CIT is the number of documents for each term.
I see other terms of interest, such as filter, filtering, and filters.
These terms can be selected and registered in the computer's memory, causing a set, our set number 1, to be generated.
I do the same for osmosis.
An expansion shows that no other term seems relevant, so osmosis.
So that was the workplace. Now, still at that point, online searching was mainly confined to universities and large businesses, but eventually it started working its way down to the consumer. I don't know how many people remember Prodigy. Anybody? A couple of you? That was actually owned by Sears, Genie, some of these other CompuServe, and they were very basic. Of course, there was no web browsing, and then they were mainly for games. There were also some of the news services. Chicago Tribune got on early, and some others. So consumers started being able to do their own online searching as well, but they were pretty rudimentary, to say the least. So then we had search engines. When the internet really got popular in the 1990s, first there was the time before the browser, but then when the web browsers came out, Netscape, a lot of very bad search engines came out. Hotbot and InfoSeek and Excite and some of these other really old ones that just didn't work well. And librarians and others sort of got excited when Alta Vista, how many people remember Alta Vista? Okay, most of them. It actually allowed you to do fairly advanced searches, but what you get back is usually a mess. Even though you could do Boolean searching and so forth, it was cluttered, it got cluttered with ads, and you'd have to wind through the spam and the junk and everything. So it was the best so far, but still, 1998, this is Google's first page. when they first came out was Google. And Google really changed everything. So, why did Google succeed? Why did it do so well? Well, there are a lot of reasons. First of all, it had a very clean interface. It actually got cleaner than this. This is a little bit of an experiment. When it came out of Stanford University, it also indexed much more of the web. It was much larger and crawled many more pages than the other previous ones. It was extremely fast. But most importantly, for people who are doing research and searching, it worked. And by it worked, it means what you search for, you usually got back things that were relevant and helpful. So, why did it work so well? So, there are a couple of reasons. In addition to applying its own algorithm like the others did about trying to match the keywords in your search statement to words in various web pages and find ones that were the most common, that appeared most frequently or towards the top of a page, the algorithm would prioritize. It also, its great innovation was something called link rank. Sorry for all the questions, but it helps me understand, gauge a little bit. How many people have heard of link rank? Okay, so just a couple of you. So, and link rank was truly an innovation that changed really searching forever. What happened was that the founders of Google, Larry Page and what was the other one? Sergey Brin, thanks. They came out of academia. They had PhDs in computer science, and they took, in a lot of ways, they adapted the scholarly approach of finding out what is relevant and useful, by ranking almost scholars by how many citations they had. So very often, we still do this today, even though it's highly imperfect and criticized. We say, oh, this scholar is ranked very highly. He's got 501. She's got 600 citations, and so on and so forth. So it was almost like it's like a referral or reference. So Google said, let's also do the same thing, and we're going to give a huge boost in our algorithm to those pages that have a lot of links coming in. Lots of links, and especially if those links themselves have a lot of links coming in. And those links there have a lot of links coming in. It was like this ultimate wisdom of crowds, word of mouth reference. And it really did work. Sometimes the analogy with the wisdom of crowds that's used is if you're driving somewhere, let's say you're out west, you've never been there before, and you want to stop for lunch, and you see two diners, and one looks like this, there's nobody there, and the other one is pretty crowded with a lot of people. The one you're probably going to choose is the one that's crowded, because they're in a sense, by them going there, they're recommending it. They're saying these people are going there because it's probably pretty good. So as long as you can get a seat, you'll choose the one that's popular. So this popularity metric, which we're still using today, though it's evolved in different ways, and it's problematic, of course, in a lot of ways, but it's also really saved us from the mess that was what was on the web in terms of what we were able to get so far. So by the time Google had kind of matured a little bit, by the early 2000s, we could say it was almost like the classic Google. So what did that look like? Well, eventually it got up to about 3 billion searches a day. These are some of the basics on how Google generally worked. If you put in more than one word, the default would be an and, Boolean. So it was limiting. Some of the earlier search engines would make it an automatic or, which was very messy and you get all sorts of irrelevant words. So the and, it allowed you to use quotation marks for phrases, and there's some advanced search possibilities that a lot of people still don't know. In fact, sometimes if I mention to a student or two just a few of these things, it changes their whole experience in searching Google. Things like how do you limit to just edu sites or .gov sites in the search? Or how do you only retrieve PDFs or PowerPoints, because PowerPoints might be conference presentations and more relevant. PDFs are often reports, maybe government reports. How do you limit by date? So certain things like that Google's now kind of hiding its advanced search a little more than it used to be. You can still just put into Google Advanced and pull it up and be able to do things like this. The other things that Google got to be known for was a certain level of personalization, which is a little bit controversial too. But basically, when you do a search, you're going to get different results than someone else doing a search for a variety of reasons. The biggest ones, apparently, are primarily based on your geographical location. Google will customize or personalize by where you are, exactly where in your larger geographic area you are, and also by language that you're using. But you will also you may get some different results based on your past search history. That's a little controversial. Somebody I spoke with at Google to prepare for this actually that I know of, who was kind of one of the main search people, he really discounts that there's much of this going on, and they might have done more, now they're doing less. But he did explain to me that you and someone else could be searching for something exactly at the same time, sitting next to each other, and you may get different results at the same time for a couple of reasons. One is how fast the web changes and how dynamic it is. But the other is that these requests are sent to different computer centers. One could be in California, one could be in North Carolina, one could be in New York City, and they're going to process differently based on where your request was sent. But ultimately, again, Google is all about relevance and value. And today, Google looks at about 200 different signals to decide what should be, where the results should be ranked, what should come up higher or lower. And it looks, again, at those traditional keywords. Again, it looks at those other links. But it looks at a lot of different aspects. And in fact, there's a really good journal called Search Engine Land, and they published this, what they call the periodic table of SEO success factors. And SEO is, for those of you who don't know, search engine optimization for businesses that want to make sure that their pages get ranked highly. And he explains, Andy Sullivan, I think, originally did it, who's one of my trusted sources, about the words, is it fresh, how is it created, the architecture, does the HTML title text contain keywords relevant to page topics, and he ranks how important each ones are, on the page, off the page, and there's all these different factors that work together and are prioritized. And people that are into search engine optimization really study this in great detail to make sure that, especially if you're selling something or even if you're not selling something, you want to be found on the web. So it's very complex. Google isn't very specific about exactly how they do it because it's their, quote, secret sauce type of thing, but they will reveal something. So Google has evolved, though, starting around 2012. It's always evolved. But before 2012, Google would do a little bit of a few things to sort of help you figure out what you really want. It would use this really good algorithm. It would also do auto stemming with the words, adding gerunds or taking them away, putting in some obvious, clear synonyms. So if you didn't think of the right word, it will try to help you. So it was almost like fathers know who's best. You may not know, but we're going to help you out. But then they got even moved more in that direction. By 2012, they created something called the knowledge graph. And the knowledge graph was a way to take concepts and connect them. And it was much more conceptual rather than word-based. And that was something that was going to make searches even more relevant and helpful, supposedly. And they probably did. And then, just in 2015, Google introduced something it's called RankBrain. And that's where it really integrates its machine learning, which is a form of artificial intelligence. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And that's what we're all using now. And it still doesn't represent the entire algorithm. It represents anywhere from 20 to 30%, but that's a huge chunk of Google's algorithm. So machine learning, I mean, here's just a Wikipedia definition. I'm certainly not an expert at it. I know a little bit about it, so we'll go to Wikipedia, but it's a good definition as any. Machine learning is the scientific study of algorithms and statistical models that computer systems use to effectively perform a specific task without using explicit instructions, relying on models and inference instead. It is seen as a subset of artificial intelligence. So basically, as the term implies, it's not just following rules, it's seeing what comes back after it applied those initial rules, making new connections, new inferences almost, if you want to use that word, and refining and making future intelligence decisions better, how it processes them. If I was a computer science was listening to me, they'd say, I'm using all the wrong words, but I'm trying to get you the right idea. But in search engines, where does this machine learning come to play? Things like pattern detection. So, okay, this result kind of looks like this result because they have these things in common. So next time we're going to give a boost to this result instead. Oh, here's an interesting new thing. All these sites that just turned up for these people's searches over and over again, they have this signal that we never thought was important. We're going to integrate this signal now, and it's going to be one of our ranking signals. And machine learning is being applied by Google here, not even just across the board. And how it's used and how much of it's used depends on specific queries. And so ultimately, what Google is trying to do is learn our language, and even more than our language is trying to learn what is it we really mean. What do we mean when we're using Google? What do we really want, even if we can articulate it, even if we can't even articulate it to ourselves in some ways. So what are the implications of all this? So Google doesn't know better than you what you want? Perhaps, probably. It seems to work. In fact, this is a little bit of a side view, but in terms of the knowledge and power of what big data and analytics can do, I went to a talk a few months ago, someone talking about the impact, and he was saying, pretty soon you'll be going to your doctor, and your doctor will say to you, you know, I've been looking at some data, and the data says you have a 67% chance of developing diabetes in the next 5 years. And you might say, why is that? And the doctor will say, I don't know. Because they can't figure, there's too many data inputs, too many points, but it'll be probably correct. So that means we're giving up control, and this has been an ongoing process, really, I think, since the search engine, in a sense, or even since the desk set movie. So how do we feel about this of giving up control? What does that really mean? And it also means, from a very practical standpoint, I started noticing this about a year or two ago, and I thought, what's going on? I would put in a phrase or keyword, and I'd get back relevant results or useful results, but my words and phrases were not in there. That was always never the way Google would work. That would be the requirement, your word or phrase, that's why it's there. But Google could find something better now that doesn't even have your word or phrase, because its rank says we have a very high likelihood of probability this is going to be very useful to you. And again, bottom line is it seems to work. So, before going into this next sort of any just questions or comments on anything we've talked about so far, anything that wasn't clear, any experience you've had that you're wondering about with Google, any observations? We'll have more time to talk a little bit in the end. So what about this is Google bias? Actually, yes. Yeah.
Does having something like that network of links, like that was in the browser, is that still really important?
Yes, it still is. It's still important. It's still a big factor, actually, but it's being pushed, so it's no longer the biggest factor now. It's still a major factor, though. It is. And that's sort of what's made Google so successful. So they don't want to give up on it, I don't think, either. All right, so this is like a crazy broad question, but I'm going to ask you two choices, just a yes or no. How many people would say, if they saw this, they would agree with it? Yes, Google is biased. Okay, and how many people would say it's not biased? Okay, so could somebody who said why Google is biased explain what you mean by that, or why you think it's biased? Somebody who said yes or has a strong feeling about it? Yes.
Because humans are biased.
Because what?
Humans are biased, and humans construct the systems. As I understood, the source of the bias in the systems is the humans that construct the systems.
Okay, so let me refine this a little further then. See if it changes. Is Google search algorithms biased themselves to promote sources that have a certain perspective or point of view versus another? I'm going to limit it to that. I'm going to ask you how many people would say yes to that? Okay, a little less. And how many would say no? Okay. Somebody who said yes, again, tell me why you think their algorithms might be programmed to favor a certain type of result. Yes?
Can you pay money? Aren't there like people who do SEO for a living to try to get their company's results?
So, yeah, this is a complicated topic. And one of the problems is, let me go back to this, is what is it we mean by bias, okay? Because bias can mean a lot of things. And just checking how I'm doing with time. So, we can say there's inherent bias in any algorithm, because an algorithm, let's say, in Google's sake, is biased to say those sites that have more pages or links coming in should be ranked higher, or those that have, so there's an inherent bias just by saying, what do we want to emphasize? There's also what's called statistical bias, and I'll get into that in a minute because it plays on another area I'm going to be talking about. And then there's the intentional agenda-based bias, where you want to have a certain result happen. You're usually not transparent about it because you're going to gain, or some things you like are going to gain, either monetarily or politically or in some other way. So all algorithms have a built-in bias in the sense that somebody has decided this should be ranked higher, this should be. But what's happening now is that there's a lot of stuff in the air about coming on Fox News from Congress, and then here's a tweet from Trump just a few months ago. Google search results for Trump news shows only the viewing reporting of fake news media. I guess he had a typo there. In other words, they have it rigged for me and others so that almost all stories and news is bad. Fake CNN is prominent. Republican, conservative, and fair media is shut out. Illegal? So we're getting this blowback now, really more than ever, saying that Google is favoring the left or liberal newspapers and so forth. So why is this happening now, and is there any truth to it? So I really took this opportunity because I was just really curious about this, and I saw these very scholarly studies that seem to allege Google bias, and I ended up really digging into this pretty deeply. So there's one researcher, his name is Dr. Epstein. He used to be Robert Epstein. He used to be editor-in-chief of Psychology Today. He's widely published. He's not some screwy guy, though maybe in some ways. But he's written about a bunch of articles. One, a really good one, I think, personally, one called The Search Engine Manipulation Effect and Its Possible Impact on the Outcomes of Elections. There he's just saying that he's done some really good controlled studies that show that based on the results that two groups can get, if they're shown one set of results versus another, they're more likely to choose a different political candidate. That seems reasonable in some ways. He first went by shopping. Like when people see certain items when they're shopping, you're going to likely choose shopping. Why can't this work for politically? And isn't this a potential danger to our democracy? Which I think is actually a really interesting point to say we have a large source of non-transparent power here, able to potentially influence, whether it's happening or not, is not even necessarily the biggest question. Well, it's a big question, but it's the concept of a large unaccountable power force that could manipulate our voting and other things. But he's also had other things, and this is a white paper on his site called the American Institute for Behavioral Therapy, a method for detecting bias in search rankings with evidence of systematic bias related to the 2016 presidential election. And here he went another step beyond, and he showed on some charts and graphs in there that a couple of random searching, people got more searching the same kinds of words or phrases, more pro-positive Clinton than positive Trump. So what's going on? So I was able to arrange an interview with both someone at Google, who I trust very much, as well as this researcher. And I told him it would be a 10-minute talk, because I know it's very busy. We spent on the phone for an hour. And basically, check my next slide here. Okay, basically, here's how it all comes down. So he's on a mission first. Oh, and here's the crazy thing. Before going to this, I found that his work was being quoted on Fox News. I found it on Russia TV, on satellite, on Sputnik TV, and they're quoting him and they're using his information in a variety of ways. All roads lead to Russia, I found out, I guess. Where is this going to take me? So anyway, he's on this mission, which I, from a personal standpoint, think is an important and good, because we're finishing a book about what's the problem with large unaccountable power of large data centers and how they can manipulate us. But he said if he could do it all over again, he would not use the word bias, because he was talking about statistical bias. He would just say he didn't mean inherent agenda-based bias. There was something in these systems that resulted in a mathematical bias one way. And he wasn't alleging, and in fact, he was telling me, for what it's worth, I actually am a Clinton supporter, and he was very dismayed that so much of his work was being taken and leveraged and used by far right, including working its way all the way up to Donald Trump, to say, here's another example of how Google and the media and everybody are biased against me. So, and because everything is so politically charged right now, and he did use the word bias, and he does study these effects, his work is being used in that manner, even though I mostly believe him that he didn't mean it to be that way. And the other problem is that, of course, there's a lack of clarity and understanding by the public and Congress itself on technology, on AI, on search engines, so it's very easy to confuse people about this too. So there's a huge lack of another form of political information literacy, or whatever we want to call it. So, so my bottom line is, I guess, that I don't believe, I could be wrong, this gets to this point. One area that, and again, this contact I have at Google, he's a PhD, he's kind of an expert on helping people do search. He's a nice guy. I met him at a library conference years ago. He's sort of my go-to guy. He said, I wish Google would be more transparent about this. Because Google, the problem is, he said, the PR people, he said, I wish Google would just explain. But he said, Google doesn't do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, he thinks that, the reason I'm pausing is because I'm on the edge of a sneeze. It's coming and going. So he said that they think it's going to be just adding fuel to the fire. As soon as they say anything, it's going to start like a debate that's going to go downhill. He was also said Google's not confident that people even understand it. And he also raised something interesting. He said people need to, he said one of the problems with a lot of these researchers is that they're trying to study complex systems that they don't have full access to the information about how they work. He said, I'm not sure if there's a word for that, or that should be a field of study. He said, but I think that's a problem these days, as people try to figure out stuff that are complex that they don't have access to the inner workings. And that people are trying to guess. And of course, if Google was more transparent, they could do that, but Google doesn't want to be more transparent for a variety of reasons. So it's a bit of a conundrum. All right. So that's a lot of what's going on with Google in a nutshell. Questions, comments, anything? Yes?
Going back to your question that you asked before you first opened up for questions, you asked us, Maureen and I got at something that for me I think is, in do you trust Google? I think fundamentally what separates it from me is this organization or a company? And a company has a very different motive for giving you information, right? And so like organizations tend to be more altruistic, companies have different agenda, and so like inherently, because they're a company, for me, I label them as biased. They just can't be as objective as they would like to be. And again, that introduces human elements into that. So I wanted to gauge your reaction.
And yeah, I both agree and disagree with that. I agree from it in the sense that as librarians, I always like to stress that we have no agenda. Unlike a company, unlike Amazon, unlike Google, our only agenda when you come to us is to help you do a better job, help you get what you want. There's nothing, and that's why libraries and librarians are still one of the last, if not the last, trusted institution, I think, anywhere. So I like to point out that same difference, that we have no agenda other than helping you do your job. My only caveat with that is that, and as a caveat to my caveat though, is that I think it would not be in Google's own self-interest to eventually be seen as not being a reliable, neutral place, even though flawed, because that's what they bank on as their bread and butter. That's who they are. So if they were doing things that were penalizing the researcher and emphasizing monetary or political gain, even in a small way, even in like this person's research coming out, they're going to suffer for it. But then I say the other problem with that argument, though, is that Google today may have that, but what if Google merges with a company in 5 years, or if someone gets 51% acquisition, or a new artificial intelligence firm by Amazon and eBay join up together, and they don't have the same pedigree of PhDs like Google had, and so the concept of an unaccountable company deciding what we could read and see and not see is extremely relevant. I personally am sort of biased towards Google, thinking that right now I don't think they're doing that intentionally, but the fact that they're a company means I think we always have to be alert to that fact, that they've got shareholders, they've got, constituents, and so unlike libraries.
You didn't mention about you didn't talk about the personal history of a person.
Yes.
Like improving your search based on your own searches, your own past.
Now
Or your profile. I don't know
Yes.
how much information they might be gathering
Well,
from a
it's
person
really-
to create your profile.
I went into this assuming, based on everything I've read and known, that it does personalize a lot of your search. And that, for example, if I searched while logged into Google versus logged out, or if somebody else, the other people would get very different reviews, different results. From what I've learned, and I'd like to go back to this again, because it's still a little negative, that it's extremely minimal now. There's that real personalized search based on your search history, based on my Google contact, as well as this Danny Sullivan, he now works for Google, used to be an independent journalist for years at Search Engine Watch, that they do very light, very, very minimal personalized searching. So the word is that that's not really a big deal. That goes against what I also have thought I may even experience, though there's also this effect, there's a name of a it's a psychology. There's an effect where if you look for something, you'll see it, too, a psychological effect, and some people blame it on that effect, the Bader-Meinhof effect, something like that. So I don't know. I'm leaning to thinking they're probably correct, because again, it's a problem of analyzing complex things so you don't have full information access to it. But I'd like to check more. Was there another hand or question? Okay, so let's, in our last bit of time here, which is, okay, it's a little behind, let's talk a little bit about what's happening with news, media, and young people. So I'll probably go a little faster. So obviously, it's nothing new about the news that traditional news forms and formats continue to decline. Print, broadcast. Last week there were 1,000 news layoffs from BuzzFeed, Gannett, one other. So that was huge. News sites have continued to try to figure out what exactly is their business model. Should they have a paywall? Should they have limited access? No paywall? Nobody's really, should they have sponsorship? Should they have donors? Should they not be a nonprofit? And so on. So that's just the big picture. Though, so when it comes to young people, there's all sorts of studies and surveys and analyses going on right now. But most of them they're not always consistent with each other. But there are some themes that I pulled out. So this is just my own non-scientific review of areas where they generally agree. So some of this is obvious. Traditional news consumption forms continue to drive. By young people, yes.
So I was just going to ask you, what do you mean by
Yeah, so I'm going to get more specific in a minute. By this, I'm probably talking about 16 to 28, but then I'm going to go to Gen Z in particular, which is anyone who's 21 or younger, apparently. So this is a little broader young people, maybe mid to late 20s and younger.
Young to us.
Young to us, right? So what's growing? Things are, again, you probably know all this: short, viral, memes, videos, user-generated types of content. Social media as a source. Facebook is still high but trending down. YouTube is what's going way up. It's again not just for social, but for as a place to get your quote news. One study I like quite a bit. I'll just scroll through a couple of their pictures because they had really good graphics. This Broder study is interesting. Some of these graphs. So this is in terms of who's going to social networks for their most important source. 18% of boomers, 26% of Generation X, 48% of millennials, 59% of Generation Z. I like their pictures. YouTube is way up for Generation Z. Okay. Percentage of news consumed considered entertainment. Who's that? Yeah. Okay. Highest among Generation Z and millennials. And this I thought was a little problematic potentially. Most journalism is relevant to me. Actually, a lot of people, but mostly actually millennials in this case compared to Generation Z. But a pretty good chunk to say most journalism is relevant. So there's a lot of these studies out there right now. And I think they have some interesting implications. Yeah. Okay, so let's just focus on Gen Z because that's who's coming into colleges now. So anyone born after 1997 generally, so the oldest is now 21, so we have Gen Z here. Media news habits, Facebook declining, YouTube growing. A lot of focus on creativity, content creation. It's all about the phone. Everything happens on the phone as opposed to like a laptop or any other electronic device. Skeptical of all media, news, and authority. Not everybody is. So kind of like almost dismissing everything. Is that good or is that not good? We can talk about that. Prefers to rely on friends and groups for knowledge, trusted knowledge. It's all about trust. Who do you trust? And really good detectors of BS, ads, claims, most media, and so forth. So, anybody Gen Z in here? Yeah, I know. So maybe it's paying off. According to Pew, our favorite sources, younger Americans are better than older Americans at telling factual news statements from opinions. So that was a surprise, to me at least. I wanted to dig into that a little bit. But it just means sometimes our assumptions we have to be a little careful about that.
I'm really curious about, I'm intrigued with that idea because I think it's about context. So I've actually witnessed that, like among Gen Zs actually, that depending on where they're reading that fake news, so if it's from a trusted source, they actually give it more credence or credibility than if it's like they discovered on a website on their own, right? So they can exactly if it's from a friend or a parent, they're like, oh, this must actually probably be a little bit true. And so I'm fascinated by this.
So the people, the aspect of a person rather than some nameless authoritative source, right?
Yeah.
An expert or an authority.
Yeah.
Well, and I've worked with high schoolers for 7 years, and they're very similar to what you're saying. They rely on Instagram posts from celebrities, and whatnot, and you tend to, how much credence are you going to give to somebody's opinion as a fact or as so you have to be careful that you have to have some source that is factual somehow. Where that is, who knows? But
that's going to be kind of our last bit here as we move into that. Was there any other questions or observations? Yeah.
This isn't about news per se, but there was a cartoon in the Campus Times, and I think it was yesterday's edition, and it's two women speaking. I presume they're supposed to be college-age women, and one is recommending this movie that she saw, and how great it was. As she's describing the points that she enjoyed, her verbiage is sort of obscured by her friend looking it up on her phone, and then the friend saying, oh, I'm not going to watch that. It only got 40 points on Rotten Tomatoes. And I mean, if Marcy recommended a movie to me, I would watch it, even if it got 40 or 20 on Rotten Tomatoes. Because, well, I mean, we've talked about movies before. Our taste matches up, but it's sort of the opposite. It's the opposite thing. I'm not going to listen to my friend. I'm going to look it up online and then.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole quote wisdom of crowds thing. That, in my opinion, at least, and sometimes it really works, and sometimes it doesn't. It all depends. And this distrust of that single source expert versus the group. Wikipedia versus an encyclopedia entry written by one PhD person.
There's something else that's interesting to like.
Yeah.
Rather than news sources.
Right.
Also, often we rely on news to like analyze stuff, whereas it's often there's like op-ed, and people feel like that's being pushed as a fact, but it's like really just someone's.
Right. Well, I think there's a whole blurring. That's why I was a little surprised about this. I'd like to dig more into it because I think because of the internet and so many other things, there's been a blurring of fact versus opinion. I know teachers often, one of the things they first have to teach in the classroom is like, this is a fact and this is an opinion, and why it's so important to distinguish that, and that one person's opinion isn't as good as anybody else's opinion, per se, and that there's and it's this whole role of expertise too. What is an expert, and when do we have? And then, you know, we had a speaker here on campus last year who authored that book, The Death of Expertise. I didn't get a chance to go to it, but I've seen his book. And so there's all these things going on at the same time. So that does lead me actually to this last part here, which is, okay, so what, given all this, what is our role here? So is there anything missing? We know what students are pretty good at, that they don't know that they don't know that they need to know. Are they too skeptical or not? And David Weinberger, one of my favorite authors and analysts, he said something, if you only teach how to destroy arguments and to spot bad arguments, you're not doing enough, because you also have to teach students how to believe. So I thought that was just something interesting to ponder. So if you don't mind, in the last 5 minutes or so, if you, either yourself or in groups of two, could just think about these two questions, either yourself or in a group of two is better, but you can do it yourself if you don't mind. And then let's take the last 5 minutes after you do this for 5 minutes to just chat as a group a little bit. Yes? Yeah.
This uptick in video news from YouTube, do you know what they're watching? Are they watching clips from the
I don't know. I wish I knew. I don't. I think it's a lot of celebrity stuff and what people are just like saying, like people commenting on what's in the news, like, oh, this happening here, let's do this. I know there's probably a little, I don't think they're watching MSNBC. If I had to make a guess. It's not. It's like little clips of viral things, crazy stuff. The ladder falls on a dog. Mostly it's that. It's my informal impression.
They were showing the same exact curve, but the much different. Like somebody literally was like, right. And then the conservatives, this was the conservative spin on what she said. They were, oh, she took that whole slide, and it's like, what? So something like that. Having a website that tells you both sides of the story, and you come to the conclusion what you think.
I do. My son is 6, so he is. I mean, he's grown up. He is very YouTube savvy. He thinks that he likes he wants to be a YouTube star. Like that's kind of his dream. We got him a camera for Christmas, which is on YouTube. It is.
Theoretically, it's catering to kind of the same comments on the comments, mostly negative and positive. And if they get some real removals, you could say, well, based on this information collected here.
There's a single aspect of ship operations that's not a management. Because ship operations is not a management tool. If you were driven to be non-functional, I wouldn't see how we have any choice but this condition.
Oh, it did. It went great.
Really agree. There'll be nothing else to do.
People try. We'd have to cut his higher brain functions without disturbing the purely automatic and regulatory systems. And we'd have to work out the transfer procedures of continuing the mission under ground-based computer control.
Yeah, well, that's far safer than how and how to continue these things.
Another thing, just briefly. Well, as far as I know, no 9,000 computers have been disconnected.
And the 9,000 computers ever found?
That's not what I mean. Well, I'm not so sure when I think about it.
Something somebody wants to share, throw out there, think of an idea. Anyone has nudging? All right, how about an idea? All right, everybody listen to an idea.
You're just talking about how a lot of people, when they have an opinion on something, they're looking and reading articles and news that support that opinion. And there's, in the college setting, a very important view where you should play with the other opinion as well. And I think people tend to just read what backs up their opinion and follow it.
So what could we do, what could librarians, what could educators do about it?
As librarians, I tend to, when I teach, I ask students, I want them to search for things that they get excited about, they enjoy. So I usually ask them to search for something in their topic. Perhaps we could create an exercise on where we have a topic that has two opinions. They need to identify themselves on one side of the question, and then they have to search for information
Support
on
the other,
side
yeah.
to support the other. And there are courses that do that. They need to defend things. But I never thought about that in the library classroom. I don't tend to require them to search for specific types of information.
That would be a good exercise. Jason, you were jumping like you were put something there that you would.
Yeah, we were mostly just talking about missing stuff, opinion versus fact, exploring why they don't have much respect for experts. We just talked about bias, inherent bias, and I think an interesting discussion would be the strengths and weaknesses of crowdsourced information. So, like, what do they, at least with their thoughts?
Yeah, because I think a lot, I mean, I try to remember, personally is like, I wouldn't necessarily approach things that way, but I try to keep an open mind because I know that things evolve. And usually when you're older, you're not, you have a way, it's always been true, at least the way things should be, and you have an instinctive reaction. But you have to balance that too against the fact that, well, things are evolving, but also people may not have been exposed to something they do need to be exposed to, you know, so it's like you have to do both a little bit. So, other thoughts or contributions to what librarians, educators could do here, and reactions at all? To kind of wrap up.
I think we also have to.
So it sounds like we're kind of in a bubble, and so adding another tool to their app, like okay, here we'll take a look at .org and actually one of the library all right, pick a YouTube video that you really love. Let's learn more about this, and we'll use another source that
new tools. And here, you've always done it this way like anybody else. You should see what else is out there, right? And you say, hey, I could use this for X, and I didn't even know it, right? Definitely. You had a thought too?
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to teach and we have to keep in mind is explaining bias is always present. It isn't like you're going to find somewhere that, any news source that doesn't have bias. I mean, the responsibility really falls on the receiver of the information to synthesize multiple points of view. You should be looking at multiple points of view to come up with what you think, with your biases, is the most accurate answer. So I think we have to accept that idea and teach how to synthesize information. Yes. And that's well within the purview of the library.
We're probably about 2 o'clock, are we? 1:59. Well, thanks so much. I hope you found this interesting, valuable.
For some, no, I didn't. There is another session on February 4th.
Oh, okay, I'll go to that.
No, because I started with Judy. And I said, oh my God,
Oh, yeah, no, I missed
much
that.
about Google.
Oh, good, okay.
Oh, yes.
That was really neat.
Oh, thanks for your thoughts and helping set up and everything.
This guy really resonated with me. Hey, Sue, how's it going?
Just like ours.
Exactly, yes.
Good job, Bob.
Hey, thanks, Sue. Thanks for coming. Oh, that's right. You showed up. I made you feel guilty enough, right? Much better than that one. Does he? Thanks, Mark. I enjoyed the discussion.
And that definitely brought back reflections from conversations I had with some of my radio station kids.
Yeah.